On Sunrise, the latest on the safe return to Earth of Richard Branson and his crew.
And 50 years old and still dancing in the streets. We look back on the career of David Bowie.
On Sky News, coming up, the Thin White Duke at 50. Happy birthday, David Bowie. David Bowie is celebrating his 50th birthday today. In New York, he's planning a private party and rehearsing for a concert tour. At the age of 8, the then David Jones predicted he would become the greatest rock star in England.
Hitting 50, now middle-aged and married to Somalian model Iman, David Bowie has left his wild days behind him.
Ground control to Major Tom.
The landing of Man on the Moon signalled takeoff for Bowie's career, releasing Space Oddity to coincide with the Apollo mission. Soon after, international appeal required Bowie to overcome his chronic fear of flying. With an extreme perspective of fashion, he perfected pop art, adding a theatrical element to his performances, becoming an icon in the 70s era. Recreating his image in the 1980s, the album Let's Dance became his most successful. Teaming up with Mick Jagger and then Queen brought him further success, elevating him to the superstar stratosphere, influencing others.
I would just like to thank you, David Bowie, wherever you are, for inspiring me.
But his critics have accused him of being a charlatan and a poser. However, with 34 hit singles and album sales in excess of 30 million, he has already been honoured with an award for his outstanding contribution to British music.
He's doing pretty well, to be honest. I mean, when you stack up what he's done in recent years against contemporaries such as, let's say, Elton John or Paul McCartney or one or two others, I mean, Peter Gabriel's still doing pretty good work. The actual quality of what he's doing is actually very admirable. I mean, it's not so popular as it once was. He certainly doesn't sell as many records anymore. But I think he's still got something to say, and I think he's still making a pretty valid contribution.
Brief forays into acting have not brought much acclaim. But this year, appearing on the big screen as Andy Warhol, he'll be hoping to redress the balance.
Oh, come to Garson want me to, like, model from them? Maybe you could do that with me.
Yeah, I could do that. You could teach me.
Well, I couldn't teach you anything. You're a natural.
The chameleon of rock is constantly changing the direction of his work, concentrating now on visual art and his music. Bowie is marking his half-century with a new album titled Earthling. Lucy Eastburn, Sky News.
Well, joining us in the studio this morning is Paul Lester, the features editor of Melody Maker. Do we get a sense, Paul, do you reckon that Mr. Bowie's finest hours have gone?
Well, yeah, I mean, people describe him as the chameleon of rock. He hasn't actually made any great changes since 1980, really. Let's Dance was his big album in 1983, and he's pretty much stayed the same since then, sort of churning out the same album. Until 1995, he got back together with Brian Eno, who's the producer for U2, which steered him slightly more towards a creative course, but he's not the same person he was in the 70s.
But don't you think he was one of those people, he had reinvented himself so often, there's nothing left to do?
Yeah, I mean, he would have really had to have literally changed sex. I mean, he was the first person to bend genders, as they say. He made it possible for people like Boy George to exist, and anybody you see posturing and preening on a stage, like Jarvis Cocker, can do so because of Bowie's experiments in the 70s with mime and makeup and all those ridiculous outfits he used to wear. But, I mean, he hasn't really startled us for 15, maybe even 20 years.
But he's experimented with other musical genres as well. I mean, he did the rock and roll thing, I suppose.
Yeah.
Is it fair enough? Would you describe the sort of the hits of the 70s?
The early stuff. It's
wacky rock and roll.
It was really Chuck Berry with knobs on. It wasn't anything that exciting. When you listen back to Rebel Rebel and Gene Genie, it really is just traditional R&B, glammed up and souped up for the 70s. People describe Bowie as influential. I think that's wrong as well. He's more been influenced by other people. He uses what's out there, what's happening contemporaneously to whatever he's doing, and he turns it into something accessible to the young generation. But he hasn't done that, as I say, for 15 years anyway. I think what he's going to do on his new album that comes out in a few weeks or in a couple of months is he's appropriated the new jungle and drum and bass styles which the youth of today are listening to.
So you don't actually think he's made that big a mark on pop music?
No, I mean, Oasis are the biggest band in the country. There's not a single trace of Bowie in their music. There's Blur, apart from Damon's sort of Mockney singing style, which is a bit David Bowie-ish. There's no Bowie there. Pulp they're slightly Bowie-ish. Apart from that, really, there are no Bowie bands. 15 years ago, there were a lot of Bowie bands, the Human League, and people like Soft Cell, and all those kind of camp, fey, foppish, preening types that use synthesizers in the background. They were Bowie bands, but today everyone wants to be the Beatles again, so we're back to the 60s.
So maybe if you wait another 10 years,
exactly.
60th birthday, maybe his time will come again.
I think we'll be talking about what a tremendous impact he's made on the music scene.
Right. But in the meantime, probably he could celebrate his 50th birthday by putting his feet up and just spending some of the money rather than churning out more.
Yeah, well, I don't know how much money he's actually got, actually, because he hasn't actually sold that many records. I mean, he sold a lot of records with Let's Dance. That was #1 in America and in England, but all the 80s albums that nobody can remember the titles of did disastrously badly. And the 70s ones were really more just cult hits. You know, even records like Young Americans or Low and Heroes, all these great records that were critically acclaimed at the time, they didn't actually get to #1. I think Aladdin Sane got to #1, but he's not like SLATED or one of those glam rock groups. They really genuinely did make inroads into the charts.
Okay, thank you for joining us. He doesn't really have to worry because he's got a very rich wife.
He's richer than me.
Let's have a look at the weather with Hazel.